UFC Vegas betting and DraftKings show. We have 12 fights this weekend. I'm Jon Kelly. Let's hear the picks. And we're going to get things started in the women's strawweight division as Emily Ducati is a minus 340 favorite. The comeback on Vanessa Demopolis is plus 270. And we'll start on the Ducati side. You know, she's a well-rounded prospect, still improving, I would say, but I also think has been exposed to a degree in some previous matchups. She just has the fighting style where she's typically not going to cover those big margins because even though, like I said, she's a well-rounded fighter, she usually doesn't really look to grapple all that often. Her takedown defense is solid, so a lot of times the fight stays on the feet, where she's a good striker, but she's not blowing you away with volume or power. And that's why I say she typically wins on those thinner margins. Even that Ashley Yoder fight, I would think it would have been more of a blowout than it ended up being. But in this matchup against Vanessa Demopolis, it's probably not going to matter because Demopolis is primarily a grappler. She's got a few submission victories, but she doesn't really know how to get the fight to the ground. She averages less than half a takedown per 15 minutes. And we know dating back to the Contender Series days, she's just a punching bag on the feet. And that really has been the same throughout her UFC career. The striking defense is non-existent. The cardio is not good either. And the more she gets tired outside of that first round, the worse that defense becomes. So this is one where I think I just struggle to see the path to victory for Demopolis here. I think she gets boxed up on the feet and it gets more exaggerated as the fight goes on. So we're going Ducati by decision. I don't really have much interest in DraftKings though, just because I think there's better fights to target this slate. Next up, we have Clayton Rodriguez, a minus 155 favorite. The comeback on Aliang is plus 130. And this is one where I think it could be an underrated DraftKings target because I actually think there's a good potential for this one to end inside the distance, despite the betting odds favoring it to go the full 15 minutes. We'll start on the Rodriguez side. You know, he's primarily a striker, got that flashy kickboxing style. He does have power. We know he's willing to look for things like flying knees, spinning back kicks, those type of exciting flashiness where doesn't usually work out, but if it does, it has the potential to put your lights out. And on the flip side, Aliang is a power puncher. He doesn't let his hands go all that often, but when he connects clean, he can certainly hurt you. We've seen that multiple times at the UFC level. I just don't really trust the cardio. I don't fully trust the defensive grappling either. And I don't know if either of those things are going to be in favor of Rodriguez, but I do think he's going to be the younger fighter, landing the bigger shots more consistently because he is going to be throwing more volume. So it's one where I think both guys are capable of maybe mixing in a takedown or two. Both guys have kind of spotty cardio, in my opinion. So I just slightly favor the younger fighter who I think is going to be a little bit more active. We're going to say Clayton Rodriguez by TKO. That's the official pick. Next fight up, we have Pyra Rodriguez, a minus 218 favorite now. The comeback on Ariana Carnelossi is plus 180. And before I dive into the matchup, I got to shout out my guy Pepe Silvia. He was on Pyra Rodriguez. He put it in Discord prior to last week's card. He said Pyra Rodriguez minus 130. It is going to move. He thought it would be minus 180, somewhere in that range. It's gone even past that to minus 218 now. So shout out to him. Basically a full dollar of CLV in that fight. And that's not a rare occurrence. He's one of the best out there at reading the market, in my opinion. But reading the market is just one aspect of betting MMA. And of course, we have a bunch of cool tools and resources to help you do that at fightnumbers.com. We have the odds screen, the best prices. And now we've just recently added the totals option as well. You can toggle between 1.5 rounds and 2.5 rounds to see those prices across the market. So a lot of cool stuff going on at fightnumbers.com. Definitely recommend checking out. I'll link it in the comments. In terms of this matchup, though, I just think it's very easy to break down because on one hand, we have Ariana Carnelossi, who's basically the budget version of Priscilla Cachoeira. We know what she's going to bring to the table. She's got absolute pythons for biceps, and I'm doing her a disservice by even impersonating her because her biceps are bigger than the size of my head. She's absolutely jacked, and she's very powerful. Now, the issue with Carnelossi is she has no takedown defense. Her hips, some of the weakest at the UFC level. As soon as you start shooting a takedown on her, she's just she's already on the mat. She defends takedowns at just 8% in the UFC. So while she does have that big power, there's this massive hole in terms of her defensive wrestling. And we know Pyra Rodriguez is going to pursue the wrestling. She does in basically all of her fights. She averages over 3.3 takedowns per 15 minutes. So while I expect the striking to be competitive, and by the way, Rodriguez seems to be very durable as well. So even if Carnelossi does land a couple big shots, I think she's able to eat them and then fall back on the wrestling here. I think the wrestling path is super obvious. I think Pyra Rodriguez lands multiple takedowns here and gets her hand raised in a decision. We're going Rodriguez by decision. That's the official pick. And next fight up, we have Abus Magomedov, a minus 285 favorite. The comeback on Warley Alves is plus 230. And this is a great fight to target on DraftKings. You see in the betting market, the under 1.5 rounds is juiced to the under. And I think that's right because both of these guys have clear finishing ability. Both of these guys are very explosive early in their fights. And then the downside for both of them is neither of them have great cardio and neither of them have great durability because most of their losses, they're typically getting finished and it usually does come in early fashion. Now for this matchup, Magomedov is going to be much bigger than Alves. Alves historically has fought most of his career at 170. He's at 185 here, definitely giving up some size, some reach, etc. But I don't know outside of that round one, I don't know if Magomedov has the skills to cover this big of a price tag because from a skill set standpoint, Alves should be pretty competitive here. And I do think he is a live underdog because Abus has melted outside of that first round. But I also just think the more likely outcome is Magomedov does catch him with something early, does hurt him. We know Alves has lost 4 of his last 5 fights, was finished in multiple of those as well. So I'm going to target both sides on DraftKings, but the official pick is going to be Magomedov by TKO. Which brings us to our next matchup as Melissa Gatto is a minus 340 favorite. The comeback on Tamaris Vidal is plus 270. And this is one where I think Gatto could be potentially a little bit sneaky on DraftKings. For starters, she's priced very expensive. She's the second most expensive fighter on the slate. She's wedged in between 2 guys that I do expect to be popular in Tom Nolan and Adrian Yanez. But I think she has the clear grappling path out of those expensive options because that's going to be the biggest advantage in this fight because Tamaris Vidal is primarily a kickboxer. You know, she won that UFC debut in exciting fashion against Pascal, knocked her out with the knee. But I just don't think this fighter's very good, to be honest with you. You look back on her regional footage, Eileen Perez is like mauling her in a high school gym in one of those fights, holding her up against the cage, dominating her in the wrestling. Like her defensive grappling, I think is no good. I do not expect it to be good at the UFC level. And she's facing someone in Melissa Gatto who's not only dangerous on the feet, who throws decent volume on the feet, but also has this massive grappling edge here. I expect Gatto to look to land takedowns here, even though she's not super aggressive in doing that in some of her previous fights. I just think the advantage in this matchup specifically is going to be super obvious for Gatto to pursue the grappling path. And when she gets it down there, that's going to be the biggest advantage in this fight. And I do expect her to find a finish on the mat as well. We're going Gatto by submission. That's the official pick. And next fight up, we don't have odds on this yet because it is a late replacement. We have Omar Sy taking on Tokos, and I'm probably butchering that name. I thought his name was George. At least I thought it used to be, but it's listed as Tuco on the UFC website. Wasn't there a Tuco in Breaking Bad? I want to say there was. He was one of the crazy meth dealers for the cartel. Or was it Taco? I don't know. Either way, he's fighting this weekend. He previously fought Zhang Mingyang on Road to UFC back in 2022. He was a big favorite in that fight, and he got starched. Now, we know Zhang Mingyang, because he's made it to the UFC and looked pretty good at the UFC, we know he hits like a truck. So I don't want to overrate that loss on a guy who was a big favorite there. But I also think this is one where he's coming in on short notice to replace Antonio Tricoli, who I thought was much more live here just because Tricoli is a good grappler, and I'd expect him to be a better grappler than Omar Sy, who's gonna look to wrestle. Omar Sy is a very good wrestler training at Bulgarian top team. Now, where I have concerns with Sy is he gets very sloppy in some of those exchanges. He gets reversed regularly. He gets out-grappled. Now, I thought Tricoli might be able to take advantage of some of those spots. I'm less convinced that Tokos is going to be able to take advantage of some of those spots here. So I actually think, despite the short notice dynamic, it's probably an easier matchup for Omar Sy, who is going to push a wrestling pace here. So for that reason, he's a solid target on DraftKings. We're going Omar Sy by TKO. That's the official pick. Next up, we have my guy Tom Nolan, a 485 favorite. The comeback on Victor Martinez is plus 370. And I probably shouldn't even refer to him as my guy anymore because he got absolutely starched against Nicholas Mota in his UFC debut as a big favorite. And he got knocked out there. But I think this is a clear layup bounce back spot for him here against Victor Martinez, who, don't forget, people were touting Victor Martinez against Jordan Levitt, who I bet on that fight. Jordan Levitt knocked him out, dominated that fight. It was absolutely glorious. Don't forget people that loved Victor Martinez in that spot. Fact of the matter is this guy's absolutely no good. He's got no striking. His grappling's no good either. And I think on the feet, there's going to be a massive advantage for Tom Nolan here and a clear durability edge. Despite him being knocked out by Nicholas Mota, we know Nicholas Mota hits very hard and he's a good counter striker. Victor Martinez, not so much. And we also know that Jordan Levitt has basically knocked out nobody in terms of his striking, and he knocked out Victor Martinez. I just expect Nolan to be able to do what he wants with this guy. The question is, how early is it going to come? Because at 9,500, he's the most expensive fighter on DraftKings. It needs to come early. It needs to come in that first round. I'm not as convinced that it does, though, because typically fighters coming off a first round knockout loss usually are a little bit more timid to, force those immediate striking exchanges. So it could be one where he's just kind of, getting his feet wet a little bit in round one before he ends up pouring it on in round two. Not to say that that can't be optimal, but it definitely is less likely. So it's going to be a situation that we'll dive into a little bit deeper on the DraftKings Deep Dive show for FightNumbers.com subscribers on Thursday evening. So keep that in mind. But I think as of now, Nolan is still a pretty clear target if you have the salary to get up there. We're going Nolan by TKO. That's the official pick. Next fight up, we have Angela Hill, a minus 142 favorite. The comeback on Luana Pinero is plus 120. And we'll start on the Hill side. Even at 39 years old, she's still a very solid gatekeeper in the division. Now, it's not to say that's going to last forever. She still looked pretty solid over her last couple fights. But we know the older you get, especially at these lighter weight divisions, that cliff, that age cliff where you really start to fall off, it happens fast when it happens. Not saying that it's happening now with her, but it could happen in the very near future. Now, I'm going to treat it as she's the same fighter that we've seen the last couple fights. And if that's the case, I think she's very well-rounded, very solid here. I think on the feet, she's probably the better striker over 15 minutes. But I think Pinero is the more explosive fighter and the more powerful striker in that first round. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic because I think Pinero I favor to win round one at a decent clip. I mentioned the explosiveness, I mentioned the power, and she's also a powerful judo player. She comes from a judo background and she's known to have a couple of those big judo throws in that first round. Now, the problem with Pinero and why I'm still picking Angela Hill to win this fight is Pinero is historically known as a gas bag. We've seen it in almost all of her fights. Outside of round one, she really starts to slow, and that happens even faster when she pushes any type of wrestling pace. So it's one where I favor Pinero in round one significantly. I favor Angela Hill in round three significantly. I think it could come down to a coin flip in round two. And if that's the case, I'm going to side with the fighter who I think I trust a little bit more even at this stage, and that's going to be Angela Hill. So I'm going to side with Hill to get her hand raised. I don't love the fight on DraftKings. I would say that Pinero has more DraftKings upside, but either way, it's not going to be a fight that I'm planting my flag on. We're going Hill by decision. That's the official pick. And next fight up, we have Adrian Yanez, a minus 375 favorite. The comeback on Vinicius Salvador is plus 290. And this is another great fight to target on DraftKings. I know Yanez is expensive at 9,300, but I just project these two to stand and trade with each other because that's typically what both of them like to do. And I know Yanez has kind of taken a step back now. We've seen the durability really get compromised over his last couple fights. His most recent one against Jonathan Martinez, where he just absolutely butchered his leg until he ended up getting the finish there. But this is a much different matchup against Vinicius Salvador, who's a very long and explosive striker, has clear power in that first round. But kind of like the Randy Costa fight, and I don't think he's as dangerous as a Randy Costa in that first round. But what happened there? Costa looked good in round one, even hurt Yanez at times, and then the cardio just fell off a cliff and he got himself finished. And that's kind of how I expect this one to go because both of them have clear round one knockout upside, but I think Yanez has a clear grappling path, even though I don't expect him to use it. And I think Yanez has much better cardio as well. So if the fight does get extended, that's where I tend to favor Yanez pretty significantly. So I think he gets the finish here, but I kind of think the round 2, round 3 finish, I'm waiting to see those numbers because I think it could be pretty big there, as most of people expect this fight to end early. So that could be an angle that I end up playing it. But either way, I think Yanez gets his hand raised here. We're going Yanez by TKO. That's the official pick. And next fight up, we have Themba Gorimbo, a minus 142 favorite. The comeback on Ramiz Brahimaj is plus 120. And I talked about CLV earlier, bragging about Pepe. I got to shout out my guy Ozzy here because he put it in Discord as well, put it up on the site. Brahimaj plus 215 as a bet for him. These fight numbers guys tend to know what they're doing, coming off a combined 20-unit week over Evan, Ozzy, and Pepe collectively last week. So a massive week for subscribers there. And I expect this to be a pretty big week as well. But in terms of the matchup, I do think the Brahimaj line movement makes sense because you guys know Gorimbo has kind of always been overrated by the market to me. Now where the line is now, I think that's about right. But, you know, him as a minus 2 whatever favorite, I think is just too much because this guy, while he does have some skills, you know, even though he's janky on the feet and it's kind of awkward, he does carry some power. We saw that in the Pete Rodriguez fight. But he also goes to the wrestling quite a bit, and we like that for DraftKings. The issue I have with him here against Ramiz Brahimaj is a very good wrestler, a very good grappler. Most of his wins have come by first-round submission. In fact, all 10 of his career wins have come by sub. One of them came in the second round. The rest were first-round finishes. So he's a very good grappler, very opportunistic. And we know Gorimbo tends to get sloppy in some of those grappling exchanges. We saw that against AJ Fletcher. We've seen that time and time again across his career. So this is one where I think Brahimaj is dangerous enough to potentially make him pay. And I also just don't think the striking is going to be, you know, in this big favor of Gorimbo. I don't think the wrestling is going to be this big favorite. So I just struggle to see him cover a big price tag here. In terms of DraftKings, I'm going to have exposure to both sides, but the pick is going to be Brahimaj. I think he catches him. We're going Brahimaj by submission. That's the official pick. Which brings us to our co-main event as Chaos Williams is a minus 130 favorite. The comeback on Carlston Harris is plus 110. And we'll start on the Williams side. You know, this guy's a very powerful striker. 7 of his 14 wins have come by knockout. He's very durable as well. He's never been finished in his UFC career or on the regional scene. And he's going up against somebody in Carlston Harris who is going to be the better submission grappler. He typically pushes a grappling pace, averages a couple takedowns per 15 minutes, and I would expect him to have the submission grappling edge here in this fight against Chaos Williams. But I just don't trust him to be able to get the fight where he needs it because Chaos is the better striker here. He's way more durable, and his takedown defense is not that bad. So I'd be surprised if Harris is able to easily land those takedowns and get the fight where he needs it. And I think on the feet, there's a good chance he probably gets hurt because his striking is very awkward as well. His defense could be better, and we know he's been finished multiple times in his career. So I like the Chaos Williams side here. I think he gets it done. I think it comes by TKO. We're going Williams by knockout. That's the official pick. Which brings us to our main event, as Leron Murphy is a minus 148 favorite. The comeback on Edson Barbosa is plus 120. Now, we just saw Barbosa in a main event against Sodiq Yusuff. He ended up winning that fight by decision. And I think he's still kind of being slept on to a degree against Leron Murphy here as an underdog, and he's coming off a main event, so we know he has experience there, something that Leron Murphy doesn't have. And even though Murphy's had this great UFC run and he's winning all these decisions and getting all of these victories, I just don't think he's a guy that I want to be laying juice on in a lot of matchups, particularly matchups where I think he lacks the experience edge, he lacks the finishing ability, because we know Murphy isn't really much of a finisher. Yes, he's got powerful leg kicks in terms of like the body kicks, the head kicks, but outside of that, like I don't really see him finishing many people. And even though Barbosa does have questionable durability, I'm not sure if Murphy's going to be able to put his lights out here. And if he doesn't, from a skill set standpoint, I expect Barbosa to have some advantages here. We know historically Barbosa, one of the most dangerous leg kickers in the division in terms of the calf kicks. I think he could beat up the league leg of Leron Murphy here. We know Barbosa's a pretty good boxer as well. He's got power in his own right. And I don't think Barbosa is easy to grapple either, because we know Barbosa can be grappled, but typically he makes guys work and it doesn't come easy. And Leron Murphy doesn't aggressively push a wrestling pace. He only averages just over one takedown per 15 minutes. So I just don't see the angle. Like, people expect Murphy to come in here and put on a wrestling clinic and land 5 or 6 takedowns. Like, I'd be really surprised. And if he's not doing that, he doesn't throw much volume. So now he has to hurt him, in my eyes. To clearly win these rounds, he probably needs to hurt Barbosa. And while that's possible, I just don't think it's all that likely. And I just think there's more upside on the Barbosa side. I think Barbosa even has some sneaky grappling upside himself, which I don't expect to be a popular opinion this week, but we know Leron Murphy can't defend takedowns. He gives them up very easily, and he gets controlled as well. So if you want to talk about takedown defense, I think Murphy's is much worse than Barbosa, and we saw Barbosa even go to that wrestling a little bit against Sodiq Yusuff, so it wouldn't be the craziest idea. I just think there's much more upside on the underdog at this price. So even though there's some durability and age concerns, I'm going to back the veteran here in Edson Barbosa. Barbosa by decision. That's the official pick. And as always, guys, fightnumbers.com will have my DraftKings player rankings, my ownership projections as well. We have the odds screen, which updates in real time for live betting, where, of course, you could see the money lines, and now you could see the totals as well between 1.5 and 2.5. You can alternate. We also have the best prices screen for those that are just looking for a quick scalp, where to get the best price across the market. So that's all just the odds screen. And then, of course, we have the Fight Prop Finder, which is a free tool where you can compare the prop prices across the market by just searching a fighter, and it'll pull up whatever his method of victory props are priced at across the market. So it's just a much cleaner and easier way to line shop than some of the other free alternatives on the market. So definitely check those out. Fightnumbers.com. Like I said, I'll link it in the description below. Best of luck, and we'll see you guys at UFC 302.